Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a deeply heartbreaking breakdown of community safety right in a New York City neighborhood. It's a tragedy born from ignored warnings, and it culminated in a totally irreversible loss. So let's just get right into exactly how this happened.
Take care of my children. Those were the reported final desperate words of a dying father, spoken right there on a city sidewalk to his brother. And, well, behind every single headline we read about neighborhood violence, there's a shattered family. This profound request really anchors everything we need to understand about the true human cost of this tragedy.
Now, a fatal sidewalk confrontation. We need to realize this wasn't just some random flash of violence happening in a vacuum. It was a sudden, fatal clash that erupted right out in the open. It literally turned a familiar, everyday sidewalk outside a local neighborhood deli into a crime scene. Looking at the timeline here, you can see this tragedy actually built up over time. In the weeks prior, rising tensions and community complaints that went, well, seemingly entirely ignored. Then, on the day of the incident, a sudden confrontation breaks out, and just seconds later, it rapidly escalates into a fatal shooting. It's this dangerous trajectory of unchecked momentum, and absolutely nobody stopped it before it was too late. The victim, Abdul Saleh. To truly grasp what was lost here, we have to look closely at who this man actually was. Because he wasn't just another name in a police report, right? He was a vital, living part of his local community with a full life he was actively building. And residents consistently painted the exact same picture of him. He was a well-known, hardworking deli employee, a truly devoted father of two kids, and honestly consistently described by everyone as just kind, an immigrant who was simply trying to provide for his family. The stark contrast between his gentle reputation and the incredibly violent way his life ended, that makes this loss so much harder for the neighborhood to process. And the timing of this loss, it's especially devastating. Abdul had literally just returned from a trip abroad where he met his youngest child for the very first time. Think about that. He had just experienced the unmatched joy of holding his newborn, only to have his entire future stolen shortly after returning to his job. It's just heartbreaking. Moving on to a history of threats. As we touched on, the confrontation that ended Abdul's life didn't just materialize out of thin air. It was the absolute boiling point of a very troubled environment, heavily centered around the 28-year-old suspect, Kavon Horton, and a well-documented history of threats hovering over that specific deli. The warning signs leading up to this were, frankly, glaring. Residents knew him as a neighborhood troublemaker with a history of aggressive behavior. He had a long criminal history, previous arrests, known involvement in gang-related activities. And most chillingly, he had previously threatened workers at this exact same deli. The local residents had flagged him as an active threat, multiple complaints were actually made, yet the community's structural safety net just completely failed to intervene.
Now, let's look at the arrest and unresolved conflicts. In the immediate aftermath, law enforcement did step in and arrest Horton. But, the arrival of the justice system here is a really bitter pill to swallow. Sure, severe charges are finally being brought, but only as a reaction to an event that the community had literally been desperately warning about for weeks.
As you can see, Horton now faces incredibly serious consequences, arrested by police, facing serious murder charges and charges for illegal weapons possession. The legal gears are finally turning, and yes, the suspect is in custody. But the really tragic reality is that this necessary, severe action comes far, far too late to save Abdul Saleh. So let's weigh the ignored warnings against the devastating outcome. The lesson here is painfully clear. On one hand, we have multiple community complaints, rising tensions, and known aggressive behavior. And on the other, a fatal shooting, serious murder charges, and a completely grieving community. It maps out exactly how unresolved community conflicts almost predictably lead to totally irreversible tragedies. Which brings us to our final question. When community threats go unresolved, what is the true cost? As this neighborhood continues to mourn the loss of a kind, hardworking father, we're left with a really heavy realization. In this case, the cost was a father's life and a family's entire future. It's a stark reminder of the absolutely vital need to address tensions in our own neighborhoods before they reach a breaking point. Thank you for joining me for today's Explainer. Stay safe out there and stay informed.